As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley, two cities stood proudly against the darkening sky. Sodom and Gomorrah, jewels of the ancient world, their walls gleaming with wealth and prosperity. The evening air carried the sounds of revelry and commerce, merchants calling their final sales, the bleating of livestock, and the steady hum of thousands of voices echoing through narrow streets. In the gathering dusk, two figures appeared on a distant hillside, their silhouettes stark against the purple sky. These were no ordinary travelers, though their appearance suggested nothing unusual. They gazed down at the twin cities with expressions that held both sadness and determination, for they knew what was to come. Below them, the cities pulsed with life. Torches and oil lamps flickered to life one by one, like earthbound stars. The sweet smell of incense mixed with the less pleasant odors of an ancient city. In the center of Sodom, at the city gates, sat Lot, nephew of Abraham, unaware that these mysterious visitors would soon change his life forever. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic stories of divine judgment in biblical history. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah stands as a testament to the consequences of moral decay in human society. These cities, blessed with abundance and prosperity, had fallen into a darkness that threatened not just their inhabitants, but the very fabric of human dignity. Their sins were not simple transgressions, but systematic corruption that had infected every level of society. The wealthy oppressed the poor, strangers faced violence instead of hospitality, and basic human decency had given way to unbridled desires. The cities' corruption was so complete that their reputation had reached the heavens themselves. What transforms a prosperous civilization into a symbol of wickedness? How does a society cross the line between progress and moral bankruptcy? The answers lie in the choices made not just by leaders, but by every citizen who either embraced or stood silent in the face of corruption. What depths of depravity led to divine intervention on such a catastrophic scale? The tale of these ancient cities raises profound questions about justice, mercy, and the limits of human wickedness. As we delve into this account, we must consider, what exactly were the sins that sealed the fate of these prosperous cities? How did Lot, a righteous man, find himself entangled in such a corrupt society? What moved Abraham to plead for these cities, despite their reputation? And perhaps most importantly, what warnings does this story hold for our modern world? These questions cut to the heart of human nature and society. They challenge us to examine not just the events of the past, but the parallels in our present day. Through this ancient narrative, we find timeless insights into morality, judgment, and the consequences of our collective choices. In the fertile valley of the Jordan River, where the Dead Sea now lies, Sodom and Gomorrah once flourished as crown jewels of ancient civilization. These cities were part of a prosperous pentapolis, 5 interconnected urban centers that included Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar. The region's natural wealth was legendary, described in ancient texts as being like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. The plains surrounding these cities were well-watered and rich in natural resources. Trade routes connected them to distant lands, bringing wealth and visitors from across the ancient world. Their strategic location near vital water sources and major trading paths contributed to their economic power and cultural influence. The city's architecture reflected their prosperity. High walls of sun-dried brick, grand gates where elders dispensed justice, and busy marketplaces teeming with merchants from distant lands. Public squares and private dwellings spoke of a sophisticated urban culture that had mastered the arts of construction and civic planning. This was the world that attracted Lot, Abraham's nephew, when he chose to separate from his uncle and settle in the region. The city's apparent prosperity masked a darker reality, one where wealth had bred excess, and excess had led to corruption. The daily life in Sodom and Gomorrah reflected a society at its peak of material success, yet moral decline. The marketplace bustled from dawn to dusk with traders haggling over prices, artisans crafting fine goods, and merchants displaying exotic wares from distant lands. The air was filled with the scents of spices, oils, and fresh-baked bread. Within the city walls, distinct social classes emerged. The wealthy lived in grand houses with courtyards, while the poor crowded into smaller dwellings. The cities prided themselves on their sophisticated culture, with entertainment, feasts, and celebrations being regular occurrences. Yet beneath this veneer of civilization lay a darker reality. The treatment of strangers revealed the true character of these cities. Unlike the traditional desert hospitality that considered guests sacred, Sodom and Gomorrah became notorious for their hostility to travelers. The wealthy hoarded their abundance, showing no compassion for the poor and needy. Justice was corrupted, with judges favoring the powerful over the weak. Social status was determined by wealth and power rather than character and wisdom. The city's inhabitants had developed a callous indifference to suffering, and what began as prosperity had devolved into decadence. Even religious practices had become corrupted, with traditional values abandoned in favor of self-indulgence. The moral decay in Sodom and Gomorrah had reached unprecedented levels. What began as small compromises in ethics had grown into systematic corruption. The prophet Ezekiel would later describe their core sins: pride, gluttony, prosperous ease, and failure to help the poor and needy. In the streets, violence had become commonplace. Wealthy merchants openly cheated their customers, while judges accepted bribes to pervert justice. The strong oppressed the weak with impunity. Public squares that should have been places of community and commerce became sites of exploitation and abuse. The city's treatment of visitors revealed their moral bankruptcy. Traditional laws of hospitality, sacred throughout the ancient Near East, were not merely ignored, but deliberately violated. Travelers who sought shelter within the city walls often faced robbery, violence, or worse. The cities took perverse pride in their reputation for cruelty, seeing it as a deterrent to unwanted visitors. Family values had deteriorated severely. Marriage was no longer respected, and the sanctity of the home was regularly violated. Children grew up witnessing and eventually embracing the corrupt practices of their elders. The elderly, once revered for their wisdom, were now ignored or mocked if they spoke against the prevailing corruption. Perhaps most telling was the absence of any significant opposition to this moral decline. Those who might have stood for righteousness either fled the cities or were silenced. The few voices that dared to speak against the corruption were met with threats and violence. Even Lot, who the scripture describes as righteous, had compromised to the point where his warnings to his own family would later be dismissed as jokes. The story of Lot's fateful decision begins with a dispute over grazing lands. As both his and Abraham's flocks grew larger, their herdsmen began quarreling over the limited pastures. Abraham, showing wisdom and generosity, proposed a peaceful solution. They would separate, and he offered Lot the first choice of land. Standing on a hillside overlooking the Jordan Valley, Lot faced a decision that would shape not only his future, but that of generations to come. Before him stretched two distinct possibilities. To one side lay the hill country, more challenging terrain, but closer to Abraham and the life they had known. To the other lay the Jordan Valley, with its well-watered plains and prosperous cities. Lot's eyes were drawn to the fertile valley. The scripture describes it as appearing like the garden of the Lord, lush and abundant. The site of Sodom and Gomorrah, their walls rising proudly in the distance, promised wealth and sophistication. Markets full of exotic goods, opportunities for trade, and the chance for his family to live in urban comfort all beckoned to him. What Lot failed to consider was the spiritual cost of his choice. Perhaps he thought he could maintain his values while enjoying the city's prosperity. Perhaps he believed he could influence the cities for good rather than being influenced by them. Whatever his reasoning, he chose based on what his eyes could see, rather than what wisdom might have counseled. Initially, Lot pitched his tents near Sodom, maintaining some distance from the city's influence. But gradually, step by step, he moved closer until he finally took up residence within its walls. This progression from outsider to insider would have profound consequences for him and his family. He gained a position at the city gate, a place of honor and authority, but at what cost to his soul? Abraham remained in the hill country, watching his nephew's departure with what must have been concern and sadness. The separation of these two men marked not just a physical parting, but a divergence of paths that would lead to dramatically different destinations. Lot's integration into Sodom's society was gradual but complete. he rose to prominence, earning a seat at the city gate where elders made decisions and conducted business. His daughters were betrothed to local men, and his wife embraced the comforts of city life. On the surface, it seemed he had made a prosperous choice. Daily life in Sodom brought constant moral challenges. As a righteous man, Lot witnessed countless acts of injustice and cruelty. The marketplace, where he conducted business, was rife with dishonest practices. The poor were exploited, strangers were abused, and the wealthy flaunted their excesses without shame. The scripture describes him as being tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. Yet Lot's position of influence seemed to paralyze rather than empower him. While he sat at the city gate, he appeared to make little effort to change the city's corrupt practices. Perhaps he feared losing his status, or maybe he had become desensitized to the evil around him. His family became increasingly entangled in Sodom's social fabric, making any thought of leaving more difficult. His wife, whose name is not recorded in Scripture, particularly embraced their new social status. She established herself among the city's elite, making connections that would later make it heartbreaking for her to leave. Their daughters, growing up in this environment, were exposed to values vastly different from those of their religious heritage. Lot maintained some semblance of his ancestral faith, as evidenced by his treatment of the visiting angels. He still practiced hospitality in a city that despised it, yet his compromise with evil had weakened his moral authority, even within his own household. When crisis came, his sons-in-law would treat his warnings as jokes, and his wife would prove unable to fully break free from her attachment to the city. The tragedy of Lot's life in Sodom is that of a righteous man who gradually lost his influence through compromise. While he never fully embraced the city's wickedness, neither did he stand firmly against it. His story serves as a warning about the subtle danger of moral compromise. The divine decision to investigate and judge Sodom and Gomorrah unfolds through a remarkable dialogue between God and Abraham. The Lord's declaration is both solemn and significant. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. Abraham, knowing his nephew Lot dwelled in Sodom, entered into an extraordinary negotiation with God. Standing with deep humility yet remarkable boldness, he began advocating for the cities. "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" he asked. Beginning with 50 righteous people and gradually reducing the number to 10, Abraham pleaded for mercy based on the presence of the righteous. This conversation reveals much about both divine justice and mercy. God's willingness to spare entire cities for the sake of a few righteous people demonstrates his great mercy. Yet the fact that not even 10 righteous people could be found in these populous cities speaks volumes about their thorough corruption. The Lord's response to Abraham was clear and fair. If even 10 righteous people could be found, the entire city would be spared. This promise shows that divine judgment is not hasty or arbitrary, but carefully measured and even merciful. The presence of a righteous remnant could have saved thousands. Meanwhile, in Sodom, the residents continued their daily lives, unaware of the divine scrutiny they were under. Markets operated as usual, people went about their business, and the wealthy continued their excesses. The city's leaders, including those who sat with Lot at the gate, remained blind to the impending judgment. This part of the narrative powerfully illustrates the principle that divine judgment, though it may seem delayed, is nevertheless certain when wickedness reaches its full measure. The patience of God, though great, is not infinite when faced with determined evil. The scene also highlights the role of righteous intercession. Abraham's plea for mercy, though ultimately unable to save the cities, demonstrates how one person's prayer can potentially affect the fate of many. His concern was not just for his nephew Lot, but for all the inhabitants of the cities. As evening descended upon Sodom, 2 travelers appeared at the city gates where Lot sat among the elders. Their arrival seemed ordinary enough, yet something about their presence caused Lot to rise immediately and bow with his face to the ground. Perhaps he sensed something divine in their bearing, or maybe his years of witnessing the city's treatment of strangers prompted his quick response. With the characteristic hospitality that marked him as different from his neighbors, Lot urged the visitors to stay at his house. "My lords," he said, "please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, then go on your way early in the morning." His insistence became almost desperate when they initially declined, preferring to spend the night in the city square. Lot knew all too well what fate awaited strangers in Sodom's public spaces after dark. His urgent pleas finally persuaded the visitors to accept his offer of shelter. Leading them through the darkening streets to his home, he prepared a feast for them, baking bread without yeast in their honor. But the peace of the evening meal was soon shattered. Before the visitors could retire for the night, men from every part of Sodom, young and old alike, surrounded Lot's house. Their demands revealed the depths of the city's depravity. They called out to Lot, demanding he bring out his guests so they could abuse them. Lot stepped outside, closing the door behind him to protect his guests. His attempt to reason with the mob demonstrated both his moral conflict and the degree to which living in Sodom had compromised his judgment. The crowd's response was telling. They scorned him as an outsider who dared to judge them despite his years among them. The situation quickly escalated to violence. As the mob pressed forward to break down the door, the true nature of the visitors was revealed. The angels struck the aggressors with blindness, yet so deep was their depravity that even this supernatural intervention did not deter them. They continued groping for the door until they wore themselves out. In the urgency of that night, the angels revealed their purpose to Lot. "Do you have any others here? Sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, for we are going to destroy this place." The warning was clear and immediate. Lot rushed through the dark streets to his sons-in-law's homes. "Hurry," he pleaded. "Get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city." But his words fell on deaf ears. To them, his warning seemed like a poor joke. Years of compromise had eroded his credibility, even with his own family. As dawn approached, the angels grew increasingly urgent. "Hurry," they commanded Lot. "Take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished." Yet Lot hesitated. Despite all he had witnessed, despite the clear warning, he lingered, perhaps torn by attachments to his home, his possessions, or the life he had built. In an act of divine mercy, the angels grasped the hands of Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters, physically leading them out of the city. "Flee for your lives," they warned. "Don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away." Lot begged for a concession, permission to flee to the small town of Zoar instead of the mountains. The angels granted this request, showing God's willingness to accommodate human weakness, even in judgment. The family began their desperate flight as the first light of dawn broke over the eastern hills. As the sun rose over the horizon, the destruction began. The scripture describes it with stark simplicity. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah. The prosperous cities that had stood proudly in the fertile plain were consumed in an overwhelming catastrophe. The scene was one of total devastation. The morning sky, normally bright with promise, turned dark with smoke and ash. The magnificent buildings that had housed such corruption crumbled into dust. The marketplaces where merchants had cheated the poor, the gates where corrupt judges had sat, the houses where evil had flourished, all were reduced to nothing. Lot's wife, unable to fully break free from her attachment to the city, looked back despite the clear warning. In that moment of disobedience, she became a pillar of salt, a lasting monument to the danger of clinging to what God has condemned. Her fate serves as a powerful reminder that partial obedience is still disobedience. Early that morning, Abraham stood where he had earlier pleaded for the cities. Looking down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. The destruction was complete, testimony to both divine justice and the consequences of unrestrained evil. The once fertile plain, described as being like the garden of the Lord, was transformed into a wasteland. Nothing remained of the city's former glory. Only Lot and his 2 daughters survived, finding refuge first in Zoar and later in the mountains, where they lived in caves, a dramatic fall from their former life of urban comfort. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah offers profound moral lessons that resonate through the ages. First and foremost is the understanding that societal corruption rarely happens overnight. It begins with small compromises, growing gradually until it infects every level of society. The city's descent into wickedness reveals how prosperity without moral guidance can lead to destruction. They had everything needed for human flourishing: wealth, resources, and established civic structures. Yet they used these blessings to enable corruption rather than to build a just society. Their treatment of the vulnerable, the poor, strangers, and the weak, became the ultimate measure of their moral bankruptcy. The role of leadership bears particular scrutiny. The city elders, including Lot, failed in their responsibility to maintain justice. Their silence in the face of evil amounted to complicity. Even Lot, described as righteous, compromised his values to maintain his position and comfort. Perhaps most significantly, the story demonstrates that divine justice, while patient, is nevertheless certain. The city's behavior had continued unchecked until it reached to heaven, suggesting that God's judgment comes only after evil has fully manifested itself. Yet when that judgment arrives, it is complete and irreversible. Lot's journey provides crucial lessons about decision-making and its long-term consequences. His initial choice to settle near Sodom, based purely on physical appearances and economic potential, illustrates the danger of making decisions without considering moral implications. The progression of his choices is particularly instructive. First, he pitched his tents near Sodom. Then he moved into the city. Finally, he became one of its leaders, each step seeming reasonable at the time, yet each taking him deeper into compromise. His experience shows how seemingly small decisions can lead to significant consequences over time. The impact of his choices on his family proves especially tragic. His wife couldn't let go of the life they'd built, his sons-in-law didn't take him seriously, and his daughters were influenced by the city's corrupt values. This demonstrates how our decisions affect not just ourselves but generations to follow. Most tellingly, when the moment of crisis arrived, Lot had lost all credibility. His warnings to his extended family were dismissed as jokes, showing how compromise can erode our ability to influence others when it matters most. Even in the final moments of escape, his hesitation reveals how attachments to worldly comfort can endanger our very survival. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah holds striking parallels to our modern world. Today's cities, like their ancient counterparts, face similar moral challenges despite their technological advancement and prosperity. Consider how modern societies treat their vulnerable members. In many prosperous cities, the homeless are ignored, immigrants face hostility, and the poor struggle for justice. The ancient sin of valuing wealth over human dignity continues in new forms. Corporate corruption, social inequality, and the exploitation of the weak echo the very issues that marked Sodom's decay. The pressure to compromise moral values for economic gain remains intense. Like Lot, modern professionals often face choices between ethical standards and profitable opportunities. The gradual normalization of unethical behavior in business and society mirrors the process that corrupted these ancient cities. Even the challenge of maintaining moral clarity while living in a corrupt environment resonates today. Parents struggle to raise children with strong values in a culture that often mocks those very principles. Religious believers face the daily tension between engaging with society and maintaining their integrity. The story particularly warns against the danger of moral relativism, the gradual acceptance of wrong as right simply because it has become common practice. Just as Sodom's citizens saw their corruption as normal, modern societies risk normalizing behavior that undermines human dignity and social justice. The story offers practical guidance for navigating moral challenges in our daily lives. First, it teaches us to carefully evaluate our choices, not just by their immediate benefits, but by their long-term moral implications. Before making major life decisions about career, location, or relationships, we should consider their potential impact on our values and character. The importance of maintaining moral courage in the face of social pressure becomes evident. Like Lot's family, we may face ridicule or rejection when standing against popular but wrong behaviors. Building strong moral foundations before facing such challenges becomes crucial for maintaining integrity under pressure. The narrative emphasizes the vital role of community in moral living. Abraham's separated lifestyle, compared to Lot's integration into Sodom, shows how our choice of environment and associations profoundly affects our moral character. We need to intentionally seek communities that strengthen rather than erode our values. Finally, the story teaches the importance of decisive action when facing moral danger. Just as Lot's family was urged to flee without looking back, there are times when we must make clean breaks from toxic situations or relationships. Hesitation or half measures in such circumstances can prove devastating. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah stands as a timeless warning about the consequences of moral decay in society. Through its dramatic narrative, we see how prosperity without principles leads to corruption, how individual choices affect entire communities, and how divine justice ultimately responds to persistent evil. The parallel journeys of Lot and Abraham offer contrasting examples of life choices. While Abraham maintained his integrity in separate living, Lot's gradual compromise with evil weakened his moral authority and endangered his family. His story particularly demonstrates how initial choices, though seemingly insignificant, can set us on paths with far-reaching consequences. The city's destruction reminds us that no society, regardless of its wealth or power, can indefinitely defy moral laws without facing consequences. Their sin was not merely individual transgressions, but a systematic corruption that had infected every level of society, from the treatment of strangers to the administration of justice. Most importantly, the narrative teaches us that moral courage and decisive action are necessary when confronting evil. The cost of compromise, as Lot's family discovered, can be devastating. The lessons from Sodom and Gomorrah call us to action in our own lives and communities. We must examine our choices, our values, and our influence on others with renewed clarity and purpose. As individuals, we are challenged to stand firm in our moral convictions, even when surrounded by contrary values. We must choose our associations wisely, understanding that our environment shapes our character. When we witness injustice or corruption, we are called to speak out rather than remain silent. For parents and leaders, the story emphasizes our responsibility to guide and protect those under our care. We must actively work to create environments where righteousness can flourish and where the vulnerable are protected. The time for moral courage is always now. We cannot wait until crisis forces our hand. Every day presents opportunities to choose right over wrong, justice over injustice, and courage over compromise. As the sun sets each day on our modern cities, the ancient story of Sodom and Gomorrah continues to echo through time. Their fate stands as an eternal memorial, not just of judgment, but of the crucial choices we face in every generation. In the end, this is not merely a tale of destruction, but a profound message about human responsibility and divine justice. The ruins of these cities remind us that societies rise and fall not just by their wealth or power, but by their moral choices. Let us learn from Lot's hesitation, from his wife's backward glance, from Abraham's righteous intercession. May we find the courage to stand firm in our convictions, to protect the vulnerable, and to build communities founded on justice and compassion. For in every age, the choice remains the same: to compromise with evil or to stand for what is right. The consequences of that choice echo not just through our lives, but through generations to come. Thank you for watching this exploration of the profound story of Sodom and Gomorrah. We value your thoughts and insights. Please share your reflections in the comments below. What lessons from this ancient narrative resonate most with your life today? If you found this content meaningful, please consider supporting our team by subscribing to our channel. Your subscription helps us continue creating content that examines these timeless stories and their relevance to our modern world. Don't forget to like this video and share it with friends and family who might benefit from these important lessons. Together, we can build a community dedicated to understanding and applying these eternal truths. Stay tuned for our next video as we continue exploring more powerful stories that shape our understanding of morality, justice, and human nature.